property purchase. This webinar is brought to you by the Active Aging and Lifelong Learning Subcommittee. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Sia, and I am the chairperson for the Active Aging and Lifelong Learning Subcommittee. Today's webinar requires you to download the Tdsr calculator. The seminar will be an hour long with 30 minutes for questions and answers. You can type up your questions and you can vote questions that are of great interest to you. The next event is on the 5th of August from 4:30 to 6 p.m. on Active Aging in the 21st Century by Dr. Philip Yap and Ms. Jenny Chia. The following day, 6th of August, between 7 to 8 p.m., another seminar on Stepping into a Smart World by the National Library Board. Let me introduce our speaker for today. He is Mr. Andrew Chee. He has over 20 years of industry experience in the real estate sector, both locally and regionally. He has extensive knowledge in the field of property valuation and property investment. He held senior positions in property consultancy, development, and real estate investment trust firms. Without much ado, let me hand over to Andrew. Andrew?
Thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction. And welcome to this webinar. And my name is Andrew Chee. Just a second, let me share the... Yeah, my name is Andrew Chee. I'm a property valuer by training. And today our topic for this workshop is to help you guys to estimate what is the maximum affordability when you are purchasing your next property. Property purchases used to be quite a straightforward matter that was prior to 2009. But after 2010, with all the property cooling measures that have been implemented by the government, it has become a little bit more complex. But hopefully this workshop will enlighten you on the various property cooling measures that have been implemented over the past 10 years, as well as to help you understand how these cooling measures would affect you in your next property purchase. Okay, what I'll be covering today generally will be 4 parts. Okay, the first part I will give you a historical overview of the various property cooling measures that has been implemented by the government over the last 10 years. Followed by, I'm going into a little bit of details as to explaining what are all these property cooling measures components so that you will have a better understanding of these cooling measures. But more importantly for this workshop is for us to practice how to use an online affordability calculator or the Tdsr calculator to estimate what is the maximum affordability of your next property purchase. Okay, before I start, let's do a poll among all the participants. What you plan in terms of your property purchase in the next 3 to 5 years. Can I have a response from you, please? Okay, the results of the poll is out. I could see most of the participants are staying put at your current home. Yeah, I think this is a wise decision, especially at this moment with the COVID-19 situation. But it is also good for this workshop to kind of go through the various kind of property cooling measures so that you can have a better understanding should you ready and prepared to buy the next property. And I also have quite a number of the participants who plan to upgrade at this time. I mean, this is a time where you possibly can find some good buys out in the market. So it's good to have a lookout at this moment to see whether there are any good bargains out in the market for purchase. Okay, so the various group that I have would be those who are planning to upgrade, and there are also some that plans to downgrade. These are the, other than those who are staying put, these are the predominant options that most participants have chosen. Okay, next, let's look at, sorry. Okay, let's look at what are the property cooling measures that the government has implemented over the last 10 years. And more importantly, so take a look at this graph and let me introduce you how to read this. You can see the bar chart. Okay, the bar chart comprised of 3 different colors: the light blue, the dark gray, as well as the light gray. So the light blue, where you look at the bar chart, there's this light blue portion, and this represents the new sale. New sales refers to the new launches by developers. That means the buyer bought the property from the developer, okay? And you have also the darker shade of gray, and that is the resale. Resale will refer to purchasers that bought a property from the open market. And last but not least is the light gray. Light gray is where a purchaser who bought it directly from the developer, and before the property is TOP. TOP stands for temporary occupation permit, where you can actually physically occupy the unit itself. The buyer has actually sold it to another party. So the sub-sale portion is the portion that the government is very concerned about, because it represents how much speculation there are in the market. So as you can see from this graph, starting from 2010, and you can see that the property prices, which is in a blue line, the blue line represents the property prices, is on the uptrend. Okay, so that is following the global financial crisis, where many buyers are out in the market to buy properties. So in 2010, you can see the number 2, the tag number 2 here. That is where the government started the cooling measure, which later on I will go a little bit into more details. What are all these cooling measures that the government has implemented since 2010? But despite the cooling measure, the property prices continue to escalate. As you can see from the graph, number 2 to number 9. Okay, number 2 to number 9, the property prices continue to shoot up, as well as even those property purchasers continue to increase. So over time, from 2010 to as of current date, the government has altogether implemented 9 rounds of cooling measures, which I will go through a little bit more later in my later slide. Okay, like what I mentioned, since February 2010, the government has implemented this SSD. SSD stands for Seller Stamp Duty. In the past, before 2010, seller do not have to pay any stamp duty. Okay, so following the February 2010 cooling measure, seller who sold their property within 1 year will have to pay a stamp duty rate of 3%. Okay, and at the same time, the LTV here stands for the loan to value ratio or loan to value limit, was lowered from 90% to 80%. So there's a 10% drop after February 2010. In case some of the participants may not really understand what is the meaning of this, what is SSD, what is LTV, later on when I go into the respective component, I will explain a little bit more about SSD, LTV, and so on. So in the same year, August 2010, the holding period for the implementation of this seller stamp duty was increased from 1 year to 3 years. That means as long as you sell your property within 3 years after you purchase, you will have to pay a stamp duty of 3%. Okay. But of course, if you hold it towards the end of year 3, the rate will be less than if you were to sell it immediately after 1 year. Okay, and the minimum cash payment was also increased to 10%. Okay, and the LTV was lowered from 80% to 70% for those buyers who have outstanding housing loans. Those without outstanding housing loan, the LTV limit will still remain at 80%. Okay, next we go to January 2011. So 2011, the government further increased the holding period where you have to pay the seller stamp duty to 4 years. That is from 3 years to 4 years. So in other words, if you hold your property after you purchase less than 4 years, you will have to pay a seller stamp duty. But in this case, the seller stamp duty, again, it will be on a reducing rate if you hold it the longer. That means at year 1, if you were to sell, you will have to pay 16%. If you sell at year 2, that will be 12%. Third year is 8%, followed by the last year is 4%. And the LTV for those buyers with outstanding housing loan further reduced to 60%. Okay, as you can see, up to the very last cooling measure that were implemented, the government focused on the seller stamp duty. Seller stamp duty is very good to deter buyers from making a quick sale after they purchase the property. So what the government wants is for the buyer to hold on to the property as long as possible and not to buy it and sell it within 4 years. Okay, but come December 2011, the switch is towards increasing the cost of the purchase via the ABSD. ABSD stands for Additional Buyer Stamp Duty. So in this case, in addition to the normal buyer stamp duty that a buyer has to pay, now a buyer will have to pay additional. Okay, but of course, this only refers to specific type of buyer and not across the board, which I will explain a little bit later. So for those Singaporean buyers who are buying the third property will have to pay an additional stamp duty rate, which is the additional buyer stamp duty of 3%. Okay, but for PR, that will start from the second property. So in short, as of December 2011, for Singaporean buying the first and second property, there is no need to pay additional buyer stamp duty. For permanent residents buying the first property, again, there's no need to pay any additional buyer's stamp duty. It's only when for Singaporeans buying the third property and above, and for permanent residents buying the second property and above. So come October 2012, the maximum tenure of a property loan is being determined by MAS at 35 years. So in other words, a buyer cannot borrow a loan where the tenure exceeds 35 years. Okay, so in addition to the maximum tenure of the property loan, any property loan tenure that exceeds the 30 years is still within the 35 years, but once the tenure exceeds 30 years, or when the loan period is beyond the borrower's age of 65 years old, the LTV will be reduced. So in this case, for individual borrower with one or more housing loan, the LTV will be reduced to 40%. And if you do not have any outstanding loan, the LTV will be reduced from 60%. Okay, next we go into the January 2013 cooling measures. Again, the ABSD, additional buyer's stamp duty rate, is now increased to 7% for Singaporean buyers for the second property. So December 2011, for Singaporean buying the second property, there is no ABSD. But come January 2013, for Singaporean buyer buying the second property, the ABSD rate has been set at 7%. Okay, and if a Singaporean is buying a third property, the ABS rate will be 10%. So all these are additional costs to a buyer after 2013. And at the same time, if the buyer has a second housing loan, meaning that there is already an existing housing loan, and this buyer, what he can borrow is that the LTV limit will be lowered to 50%. Okay, and if the loan tenure exceeds 30 years or beyond the borrower's age of 65 years, the LTV limit will be lowered to 30%. Okay, and for those who is borrowing a second housing loan, the cash payment again will be raised to 25%, meaning that the buyer will have to pay 25% cash, okay, for a second housing loan. Okay, next we go into the June 2013. Before June 2013, the focus was very much of increasing the cost of purchase of a property by having this additional buyer's stamp duty and so on. But come June 2013, the shift is towards not allowing the borrower to borrow too much. So in this case, the Tdsr, which stands for Total Debt Servicing Ratio, okay, has been implemented, where in terms of the total amount of debt, including the housing loan that you're applying for, okay, it cannot exceed 60% of the gross money income. So in this case, how this interest is being calculated for the housing loan that you're applying, it will use an interest rate of 3.5% or the prevailing interest rate, whichever is higher. So in other words, let's say even when you approach the bank quote you an interest rate of, let's say, 1.5%, okay? But for the purpose of the TDSR calculation, 1.5% will not be used. it will be used at 3.5% to calculate your total debt servicing ratio. Okay, and come December 2013, for HDB buyers or those that are buying a new EC, is executive condo, direct from a developer, there's this additional guideline where the additional guideline where this MSR stands for mortgage servicing ratio, cannot exceed 30%. Okay, just to explain is that for TDSR, it applies to all property loans. Okay, for MSR, it only applies to HDB, those buyers who are buying a HDB flat, or those buyer that is buying a EC, which is direct from a developer. So this MSR will comes into play, which cannot exceed 30% of the borrower's gross income. Okay, then next will be the March 2017. Okay, 2017 is a little bit of a easing of the cooling measure. It is not making the cooling, it is not implementing more cooling measure, but on the other hand, it is easing of the cooling measure. So in this case, the SSD, which is the seller stamp duty rate, was being reduced. That means the holding period was being reduced from 4 years to 3 years. So in this case, instead of the first year seller stamp duty at 16%, now it will be 12%, okay, and so on. And the last 4th year, there will be no seller stamp duty. So in other words, buyers who hold a property for more than 3 years, on the 4th year onwards, there's no need to pay seller stamp duty. Okay, so it's an easing of the cooling measure. And again, this will be the next one on the LTV limit, where it's less than 50%. Again, this is very beneficial for, especially for retirees. Because in this case, let's say for retirees, there may be not much of a gross income, but you have an asset where you can use it for refinancing purposes. So in this case, the TDSR will not be applicable for such borrower as long as the LTV limit is less than 50%. Okay, following next will be the July 2018. For July 2018, again, there is an increase of the ABSD, additional buyer stamp duty rate, to 12% for Singaporean buyers for buying a second property, and 15% for buying a third property. Okay, and for PR, permanent resident, even the first property is now subjected to ABSD at 5%. For second property, that will be 15%. And for all the property loans, the LTV, the loan to value ratio or loan to value limit, is lowered to 75% for first time borrower. And if it's the second housing loan, it will further be reduced to 45%. Okay, and for those borrowers where the loan tenure exceeds 30 years, or where the loan period exceeds the borrower's age of 65 years old, the LTV will be reduced to 25%. Okay, so this is a summary of all the cooling measure that has been implemented over the last 10 years, starting from February 2010. Okay. And like what I mentioned on the 11th of March 2017, it is more of an easing of the cooling measure. So in total, there were 9 rounds of cooling measure implemented. Okay, the next slide, I'm going into explaining a little bit about all the various terms which I have mentioned just now, so that you will have a better understanding of all these various terms. Okay, the first is the buyer stamp duty. Buyer stamp duty, I'm sure most of you all will be very familiar, because It has been around for many, many years. So in general, if anyone who wants to buy a property will have to pay a buyer's stamp duty. So a buyer's stamp duty will be approximately about 3% of the purchase price or the valuation price, whichever is higher. But in actual fact, the actual calculation is actually based on this table here, where you can see for the first 180,000, that will be the buyer's stamp duty is only 1%, and so on until exceeding 640,000, the stamp duty rate will go up to 40%. But on the average, like I mentioned, it's generally about 3% of the purchase price or valuation price, whichever is higher. Okay, I have also mentioned about the seller stamp duty just now in my description of the cooling measure over the last 10 years. So this seller stamp duty is a tax that is imposed on the seller who sold their property before 3 years. As of current, is before 3 years. So in other words, if a buyer were to buy a property today, and if he or she sells it on year one, after year one, then there is a seller stamp duty of 12% being imposed to this seller. Okay, and year 3 will be 4%. Anything above year 3, there will no need to pay any seller stamp duty. Okay, the loan tenure. Okay, this loan tenure, like I mentioned earlier, the government has actually implemented a maximum loan tenure of 35 years for all the private properties. For HDB, that will be 30 years. So how does this home tenure affect is that basically MAS will look at the borrower's age, look at the type of property that you are financing, as well as looking at your existing housing loan. And on the last point, where the borrower's age will be calculated based on income weighted average age. Maybe let me give you an example. How is this being done? Let's say you have a husband and wife, A and B. Okay, let's say A is 40 years old, earning an income of 3,000. Okay, and B is 30 years old, having an income of 2,000. So how do you calculate this income weighted average age? Is that you take a ratio of the income by A and the income by B and look at their actual age. So in this case, the income weighted average age will be 36 years old. Okay, next will be the loan to value ratio. Okay, loan to value ratio, prior to 2010, most of the borrower were able to get a LTV of 90%. Okay, come February 2010, it has been reduced to 80%. And come July 2018, it was further reduced to 75%. But let's say if the loan tenure exceeds 30 years, okay, and if the loan period exceeds the borrower's age of 65 years old, the LTV will further reduce. Okay, like as of the most recent July 2018, it will be reduced to 55%. Against if there's against for other borrowers, that would be 75%. Okay, I have also mentioned this term additional buyer's stamp duty during my description just now. This is the additional buyer's stamp duty, ABSD. which is a tax payable by a buyer, okay, in addition to the existing buyer stamp duty. So if we are looking at the most current ABSD rates, which was revised on 5th of July 2018, for Singaporean citizens, the first time that you're buying a property, there will not be any rate charge. But if you're buying a second property, that will be a 12%, followed by a third property that is 15%. For permanent resident, even the first property is subjected to an ABSD rate of 5%, and the second and third property and third subsequent purchase, that will be 15%. Okay, as you look at the graph that I showed you in my earlier slide, despite the government implementing the seller stamp duty, the additional buyer stamp duty, property prices were still escalating. It was only when the government implemented the total debt servicing ratio, which is the Tdsr, this is when property prices start to stabilize and in fact trending slightly downwards. Maybe I can go back and show you. Yeah, if you look at number 9 here, number 9, this is where the Tdsr is being implemented. This is the time when property prices start to come down. So this is a very, very effective tool that the government has used to stabilize the property prices. Okay, before that, with all the other seller stamp duty, additional buyer stamp duty, property prices were still on the uptrend, as you can see from number 2 to number 9. So what is this total debt servicing ratio? Okay, this is where the total debt of a borrower, total debt in this case will include the any student loan if there is, any car loan, any renovation loans, any credit card debts, or any secured and unsecured loans. All these will be all added up together. And in addition, including the property loan that you are applying to the bank for your next property purchase. So the summation of all these loans must not exceed 60%. Okay, and the interest rate that is used to calculate these new loans, as you can see here, is 3.5%. It's not the whatever 1.52% that you have been quoted by the bank. So in this case, it's just being prudent to use 3.5%, which the government used the term medium-term interest rate to calculate the loan, whether do you qualify for the loan and whether it exceeds the 60%. Okay, and I have also mentioned that the Tdsr is applicable for all types of property loan, including HDB and including all private properties like condominiums, apartments, landed housing, and so on. Okay, the mortgage servicing ratio is only applicable for certain types of property. So for those property buyers who are buying a condominium, a landed property, they will not be subjected to a mortgage servicing ratio. Okay, it is only applicable for those who are buying HDB flats or those who are buying a new executive condo EC direct from the developer. Okay, in this case, the MSR, which is the mortgage servicing ratio, is capped at 30% of the borrower's gross money income. So comparing the TDSR and the MSR. Okay, I would think that the MSR is a more stringent measure versus the TDSR. If a property buyer can clear the MSR of 30%, generally he or she will have not much problem clearing the TDSR, which is at 60%. Okay, so in this case, if it's a brand new HDB flats, like those BTO direct from HDB, the interest rate used will be 2.6% for the loan. And if the purchaser is borrowing from a bank, the rate will be used at 3.5%, which is similar to what the interest rate used for the TDSR. Okay, what is this online? With this online affordability calculator, it has made property purchaser a lot easier, because generally, like what I mentioned over the last 40 minutes or so, I mentioned a lot of terms like the TDSR, the LTV, and minimum cash down payment, and so on. So with this calculator, everything will be inbuilt into this calculator. So all you need is just to key in the requirement, and you'll be able to see what is the maximum affordability that you are able to refer as a reference for your next property purchase. So online affordability calculator can be found in a lot of the website, like Property Guru, Money Smart, and so on, 99.co, and so on. But for the purpose of today's demonstration, we will be using this Money Smart as a reference for you to try out to calculate the maximum affordability. So now you can actually okay, before we start to practice, let me quickly go through the various items that generally the website will ask you to fill, and what is the significance of this item, and why do you have to fill in all these items in order to estimate your maximum affordability. Of course, first of all is whether you are a Singaporean or you are a PR, okay? And your age versus your co-borrower's age. This will be important because it will determine the LTV. Okay, and next, all this whatever cash and CPF that you have in your savings, this will again further help to boost up your affordability. Meaning that, let's say if you have more cash in the bank, or you are able to utilize more of your CPF, then you will be able to purchase a property of a higher value or higher price. Okay, and the money income is very much used to ascertain what is the TDSR, used for TDSR purposes or MSR purposes. But generally, there are two types of income. One is the fixed income and one is the variable income. So what's the difference between the fixed and variable? For fixed income, for the purpose of the TDSR calculation, it will be attributed 100% of your fixed income. Let's say, for example, if you have a fixed income of 10,000, so this 10,000 will be used as the income for the calculation of the TDSR. Okay, variable income will refers to commission, okay, commission or the variable component of an income. So in this case, variable income, because of the fluctuating manner, only 70% of such income can be used for the calculation of the TDSR. So fixed income will be 100%, But for variable income, we can only use 70%, okay, to calculate your money income as a whole. Okay, for this money commitment is basically to ascertain what is your debt, okay, so as to see whether, together with the new loan that you're applying for, whether we exceed 60% vis-a-vis your money income, which has been explained earlier. Okay, now let's do an exercise, okay, using the calculator that you have downloaded. We have this case study here. You can read it and you can try to see what's the maximum affordability that you can derive using the calculator. Probably we will take about 5 minutes or so to try this out. So we have a couple, A and Mrs. A. A is 50 years old. Mrs. A is 40 years old. Okay, and they are planning to upgrade their current apartment in East Coast. And A is a civil servant, so his income is more stable. He's getting an income of 10,000 per month, whereas Mrs. A is a sales manager earning both fixed and variable income of 5,000 and 2,000 respectively. Okay, and both Mr. A and Mrs. A, and they each have 100,000 in their bank. Okay, and Mr. A has 200,000 in his CPF, whereas the wife has 100,000 in the CPF. And the current apartment is their only property that they are owning, and they have already fully paid up their mortgage. So on the debt side, A has a money credit payment of 1,000 and a money car loan of 500. So in this case, what's the maximum affordability for A and Mrs. A for the next property purchase? This is the question. Okay, so 5 minutes is up. So I suppose most of y'all have already tried out using this calculator. And let me just briefly explain what are the components inside this calculator and how it works. Okay, so the first part is asking, what type of property are you buying? Okay, whether is it a HDB or whether is it a condominium, executive condominium or landed property. So let's say for demonstration purposes, I use apartment condominium, and the property status, I use completed. And for purchase type, okay, you can actually buy it as a single buyer, or you can buy it together with your spouse. So for this demonstration, I use with spouse. Okay, and next you will have to fill in your details, your personal particulars. Let's say, for an example, we use 50 years of age, Singaporean buyer, and not owning any property at the moment, and there's no current home loans at the moment. Okay, so for finances, there's a fixed money income of $10,000, and there's no variable income, and cash available, as mentioned in the case study, is 100,000 cash and 200,000 CPF. Okay, as for the co-buyer, age is 40 years old, Singaporean, no property owned, and no outstanding housing loan. The income of 5,000 and a variable income of 2,000. Okay, and okay, and there's a cash of 100,000. There's a cash of 100,000 in the bank and a CPF of 100,000 in the CPF account. Okay, so this is what you will get. So the maximum property price that A and Mrs. A can buy, that will be 1.78 million. Okay, maximum property price is 1.78 million. And the amount of loan that A and Mrs. A can obtain is 1.335. 1.335 is 75%, which is the LTV, the loan to value limit of the purchase price of 1.78 million. So 1.78 multiplied by 75%, you will get 1.335. Okay, that is the maximum loan amount. So next you look at the down payment and the fees. So the down payment will be whatever that you cannot borrow from the bank. The balance will be the down payment. So the down payment is 25% of the property, the maximum property price. That means in other words is 1.78 million as the maximum property price, multiply by 25%, you will get the down payment. Okay. So this down payment is 25% of the maximum property price. The stamp duty is approximately about 3% of the stamp duty is about 3% of the property purchase price. Okay, as you can see here. And the miscellaneous fee will be like the lawyer's fee, the conveyancing fee, conveyancing solicitor's fee, the bank application fee, and so on. So it's approximately about there, 3,000. And the minimum cash that you have to pay, again, that will be about 5%. That is based on the governing rules by MAS, having to pay a minimum 5% of cash. So this minimum cash amount is the 5%. Okay, and the balance will be paid by additional CPF or any cash amount that you have. So, okay, in this case, the loan has been restricted to 18 years. I mean, as you can see, based on the MAS, you can actually borrow up to a maximum of 35 years. But in this case, because you have a borrower that is 50 years old and a co-borrower that is 40 years old, so in order not to lower the LTV, the loan to value ratio of 75%, we have to keep the maximum loan up to where the weighted average age of A and B does not exceed 65 years old. So in this case, there's a balance of 18. So in this example, the loan tenure is calculated based on 18. Okay, in some of the other TDSR calculator that you can find from other websites, some they allow you to change your loan tenure. That means you can say that, no, I don't want to follow the 18 years old. I do not mind to lower my LTV, okay? And you can do that. But this example of TDSR calculator is they restrict the loan tenure up to the weighted average age of 65 years old, so that you can enjoy the maximum LTV, the loan to value ratio of 75%. Okay, so this is an example of how you can use an online affordability calculator to calculate what is the maximum property price that you are able to afford based on all the circumstances that you have, and also taking into consideration all the various measures that the government has implemented. Okay, so we have come to the end of this workshop. I shall pass it back to the chairman, Jeremy, from here. Jeremy, please.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew. It was indeed very enlightening with all the terms and abbreviation that is being implemented. So we have a number of questions. The first question we have is, what is your personal take on decision-making on the following? HDB and private property, where both balance lease of less than 60 years. In other words, if the lease is less than 60 years, what kind of decision making do one take for HDB and private property?
Okay, that is a very, very good question. Very, very good question. In fact, over the last few years, there have been a lot of such similar questions being raised. Okay, so if a property is less than 60 years balance tenure, the important criteria is to look at whether is there an opportunity for en bloc. I think en bloc is really the key, so-called key advantage, okay, when a property tenure falls below 60 years old. So of course, when we are talking about HDB, we refer to NUSS. Okay, but NUSS is very much dependent on the government. Okay, there are a lot of criteria which most of us are not being informed. Okay, but generally, it's only generally we have been told that, okay, for HDB to be eligible for NUSS, first of all, the number of blocks within estate can be further enhanced. In other words, the government can build a lot more units on a certain plot of land, okay? Of course, once the particular unit or particular block is being selected for SIRS, the government will compensate the owner based on the market price, and as well as offer some of these owners an alternative unit, which is equally in a very good location. So in other words, if you want to buy a HDB flat or a BTO in a prime mature estate, it's very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. Okay, because these are mainly reserved for those affected by SIRS. Okay, so that is for HDB. But of course, the disadvantage of buying a property with less than 60 years is that if SIRS doesn't materialize, then there is this danger that the value will depreciate, will continue to depreciate. Why is it so? Because your lease getting shorter, you may have difficulty looking for a buyer. Because if the next buyer were to buy from you after 10, 20 years, again, the lease will further reduce, okay, making him or her very hard to sell. So therefore, buyers tend to be very concerned of buying a HDB flat where the tenure is less than 60 years in this case. But for private property, on the contrary, you actually have a much wider option. Why do I say so? Is that as long as the number justified, okay, a developer who buys over a private property or an estate in a private property, the developer actually can top up the lease by applying to the SLA. SLA stands for Singapore Land Authority, to pay what we call a differential premium. Differential premium is a tax to enhance, to reset your tenure from the balance 60 years back to 99 years. Okay, but of course it's not for free. There is a tax to pay, but even with this tax, it is still a very viable options for a lot of developer. So in other words, even when the tenure is short or the remaining lease is short, developer will still be interested to buy as long as the location is good, near to transport nodes, next to amenities, next to good schools and so on. It will still be very attractive to a developer. So in most cases, to resell a property with less than 60 years of balance lease is probably easier than to resell a property, resell a HDB flat with less than 60 years. Because like what I mentioned earlier, SIRS is very much out of our control. It's very much dependent on whether the government has selected that particular estate for SIRS. So this is how I look at it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. The next question we have here is, I am a Singaporean. I have a condo currently still on mortgage and an HDB flat by inheritance, which I did not make any payment. Can I buy a new private condo, and is it considered a second or third property purchase? That's one question. The next question, in addition to that, is what if I buy a commercial property instead? Will I be subject to the ABSD, LTV, etc. guidelines instead?
Okay, maybe let me answer the last part first because it's more straightforward. Okay, let me answer the last part, which the question is, what if I buy a commercial property? Will I be subjected to ABSD?
Yes, right.
Okay. It seems to be a straightforward question, but actually it's not really a straightforward question. Okay. Let me explain why. Why is it so? Technically, if one is buying a commercial property, it is not subjected to ABSD. That means ABSD is only applicable for residential property, not commercial property. Okay, but however, okay, it may not be as straightforward as it is. I can give you an example. I was previously involved in this. I was involved in the sale of a commercial property, which is a shop house along Geylang Road. Okay, along Geylang Road. So along Geylang Road, for those who are familiar, along Geylang Road, all the properties that is along Geylang Road is zoned commercial. Okay, commercial meaning that you can use it for commercial activities, like use it as a shop, use it as a showroom, use it as an office. So this is what I meant by commercial zoning. Okay, but in this particular case is that this shop house that we were selling, the ground floor is indeed used for commercial purposes. Okay, in fact, it was used as a wholesale retail. So that is commercial. But on the second story, somebody were living there. Okay, why somebody was living in a commercial property, you may ask. Okay, because in a long time ago, before Geylang was being zoned as commercial zoning, there was still some residential component. Residential component meaning that the ground floor is used as for retail purposes, but on the second story, the same owner who is selling whatever on the ground floor live on the second story. So in this case, they have not, for this particular shop house that I was mentioning, they have not kind of converted the second story into commercial. Okay, it was still very much based on the old zoning where the second story is used as residential. So in this case, the buyer who bought over this particular property will ask to pay ABSD, not for the first story, but for the second story. So in this case, I would really urge for property buyer who are buying commercial property will have to be very, very, very careful. Okay, not only checking on the zoning of that property, but also to make sure that what is the approved use. Okay, approved use. Of course, today's session is not about going into teaching how to check the approved use and so on, but the long and short is that you can actually go to the URA website. The URA website will actually able to show you for that particular property what is the approved use. So take note of the approved use. If the second story is still approved use as residential, even though visually you see it is a shop house, and even you look at the master plan is commercial, you will still likely, as a buyer, property buyer, you will still likely be subjected to ABSD. Okay, that is on the second part of the question. Okay, let me take a look at the first part. First part is okay, so in this case, the question is that you're currently staying in a condo, but however, you're being inherited a HDB flat. Can you buy a new private condo Is it considered a second or third purchase? But because the fact is that once you are being inherited a HDB flat, whether you pay for it or you didn't pay for it, but inheritance meaning that the property name will be transferred to you. So meaning that under your name, you will have two property, a condo and a HDB flat, meaning that you will have two property under your name. Okay, whether you purchase it or it's being inherited, it's still your property. Okay, as far as to the government is concerned. So can you buy a new private condo? I would not foresee that you will be prohibited to buy another property. But in this case, you will be subjected to ABSD for buying in this case, it's not the second property, but it's a third property. Okay, so you will be subjected to ABSD for a third property purchase in this case.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question we have is, what is your opinion of the outlook of the private property prices in Singapore due to the COVID-19 situation? Do you expect private property prices to further increase? And if so, why?
Okay, again, this is the kind of very popular question, very, very popular question. I have been hearing this kind of question very often. Okay. Okay, let me briefly mention about the state of the property market as of today. Okay, if this question were to be asked 10 years ago, we have this global financial crisis that was in 2009. And as I'm sure all of you have seen that after the global financial crisis, property prices, or at the global financial crisis, the property prices plunged. In fact, almost to the extent of crash. Okay, that was in 2008, 2009, around that period. Okay, so following the global financial crisis, the prices escalated sharply, okay, due to pending demand and so on. Okay, but that was in 2009. Based on the graph that I've shown you earlier, you can actually see that prior to 2009, there were a lot of speculation in the market. Okay, how do you know that it's speculation? Okay, especially if you see that there is a lot of sub-sale going on. Okay, sub-sale is a good barometer to gauge the speculation in the market. That means people go to a new launch, people visited a show flat and buy a new purchase, a brand new property or a property under construction from the developer and subsequently sell it after 1 or 2 years before the property even obtain its TOP. TOP stands for Temporary Occupation Permit, which is where the government authority says that, okay, look, this development is completed, it's safe to be occupied, and the purchaser can actually go in and stay. Okay, that is what I meant by TOP, Temporary Occupation Permit. Obtain its temporary occupation permit. So during that period, there were a lot of speculation like that. That means go to the show flat, close one eye, buy a property, and at that time, you can actually get a loan of up to 90%. And if you're talking about prior to 2009, there is even such a thing that we call IAL, interest absorption. That means, in other words, when you visit a developer show flat, you buy a property that is under construction, you don't even have to pay anything except paying the interest. So that attracted a lot of buyers trying their luck. That means go to a show flat, buy a property. Hopefully, in the next 1-2 years, when property prices goes up, they can sell and make money. So there were a lot of such speculation in the market prior to 2009. And if you see the trend for the global financial crisis, during the crisis, yes, prices kept trending downwards, but after the crisis, prices shot up. But the situation now is very different from 10 years ago. I must say that the government has done a very, very good job. Over the last 10 years, with all these cooling measures and so on, in fact, property prices has been fairly stabilized. Not only stabilized, those buyers that bought properties are sure that these buyers are, number one, they are not speculator because of having to pay the seller stamp duty and so on. And number two, because of the Tdsr, these buyers are able to afford the property. They are not buying the property hoping to make a quick buck, you know, when property prices go up. And if you observe over the last 5 to 10 years, property prices has been rather stable. So in this case, as of today, okay, yes, I mean, this COVID-19 situation is negative in general. It's negative for the market in general. But also bearing in mind, a lot of all these purchasers over the last 10 years, they are not buying for speculation purposes, okay? And they have the holding power. They have the holding power. So they can hold on to it. There's no need for them to rush to sell the property. So if all these seller think like that, I think it's hard for property prices to so-called crash. Okay, and the next part of the question is that, do you expect property prices to further increase? Okay, this question, whether is it prior to the COVID-19 situation or at COVID-19 situation, I think my answer will be pretty much similar. It's difficult for Singapore property prices to go up. Why do I say so? Because the government has been monitoring the market very closely to make sure that property prices will be in line with the economic growth. Meaning that no longer you can see property prices shoot up, you know, where the economic conditions still remain low. So in this case, do I expect property prices to increase? I mean, that is my personal opinion. I think it's going to be very difficult. That's going to be very difficult. The fundamentals with the COVID-19 situation is not going to improve anytime in the short term. And with the government that is closely monitoring the market, I would not think the government also would allow the property prices to increase much. Because if property prices continues to increase, the next thing the government will do is you'll come up with another cooling measure this time round. So with all this, it's going to make it a very, very difficult platform for the property prices to go up. Yeah, that is my view.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
The next question we have here is, if I'm retired with no income, how can I buy a property and get a property loan? Or otherwise, can I pay cash for it and then take an equity loan out of cash? Does things like Tdsr come into play? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. It's also a question that I come across fairly often. Okay, let me go step by step. If you recall, out of the 10 cooling measures that the government came out over the last 10 years, one of the cooling measure was actually easing of the cooling measure. Easing, that was in 2017. In 2017, the government actually eased the cooling measure. Okay, one of the easing measure that the government has taken is to allow retirees with no income, okay, to refinance their property. So in this case, a retiree can actually refinance a property by taking up a new property loan, for example. And okay, the question is that whether Tdsr, all this come into play, as long as the LTV, that means the loan that you're taking is less than 50% of LTV, then Tdsr is not applicable. Okay, so the purpose of having this easing is actually to make it easier for retirees to do refinancing, to do cash out, so that they are able to use the money for whatever reason, for their purpose. Yeah. So have I answered the whole question? Let me see. Yeah.
I guess it's what he's asking. If I read the question again, is that he's retired, no income. He wants to know whether he can buy a property and get a property loan. Should he be able to pay cash for it and then take an equity loan for the cash?
Okay, so what I have said just now is actually for part 2. Does things like Tdsr come to play? Correct. So there's still this part 1. Yeah. Part 1 is, can I buy a property and get a property loan? Definitely you can. Okay, definitely you can. So in this case, in order not to be subjected to the Tdsr, there are two options. So the first option is to make sure that the LTV of the loan is lower than 50%. So Tdsr in this case will not come into the picture. So the other picture is that because there's no income, alternatively, the bank will allow the borrower to pledge his or her wealth. That means you may have other assets and so on. That is for the bank to consider that and lower the requirement for taking up the loan. But technically, it's still possible. But the details may have to really talk to the bank to iron it out. Yeah, paying cash, of course, yes. Of course, can. That means, in other words, if you are able to demonstrate that a large part of the purchase is come from cash, then I do not see any problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. I hope I have answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. You have answered the question. Yeah. This one is interesting one because it talks about using the CPF. How can buyers above 60 years get their CPF out to buy the residential property, and how much of the balance in ordinary account can be used?
Okay, this one I'm afraid I won't be able to answer because it's very much referring to CPF rules and regulations. Yeah, okay. I think we have to approach the CPF for more details in this case. Yeah.
Okay. All right, now we have enough time for one more questions, and the rest of the question we will answer by email. The questions the last question we have here on hand is, the cash in hand is $100,000 each, okay, plus $200,000 husband CPF, plus 100,000 wife CPF, total $400,000, right? Cash in hand,
Yeah.
4,000. Oh, sorry, 4,100. Okay, that's. How can they afford to pay 714,467 total cash needed, derived from the TDSR calculator? It's talking about your example.
Okay, let me see. Cash 100.
In your example, you have cash in hand, 100,000 each, 200,000 is husband CPF, and
Yeah.
total is about 400,000. So how
Yeah.
could they afford to pay 714,467 total cash and CPF, okay, derived from the TDSR calculator?
Okay, maybe this one allowed me to later, after this session, let me take a look at it because it
Okay.
involves some calculations. So let me
Okay.
take a look at it and I will answer it via the email
Okay.
for this question. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Andrew, we have enough. We just ran out of time. It's now 4:30 already. So I think for if that question and there are 4 other questions left, we will answer them by email, all right? And then we will send it to our participants. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for sharing your experiences with us, and also thank the participants, okay, for attending today's webinar. I hope it has been enriching and useful to all of you, and 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 thank you very much for taking the time to participate in this. Okay, without much ado, I would say thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.